Hi everyone. So now today the lecture we're going to talk about some review of your OOP fundamentals. Number one, we're going to talk about aliasing, and number two, we're going to talk about what does it really mean when aliasing happens at the runtime. So that's something we'd like to review. And the way we do that is by showing you some person example. And remember in your previous exercise you did about the BMI calculation, but we never talk about how the BMI calculation can interplay with aliasing. That's something we'd like to show you today. So I'm going to show you the Eclipse code as well, but now let me show you the setup in the slides, and then we'll illustrate the example from scratch on the iPad. That's something we'll do. Okay, our first Java class is a person class, and then it has two attributes, the weight and height. Let's assume the weight is in the units of kilograms, and the height is in the measure of meters. Okay, so when you calculate the BMI, you don't need any further conversion. And then we have a constructor which will initialize the weight and the height for the person, and the implementation should be conceivable, just two assignments over here. And remember, we talk about the use of the keywords, and this really talk about the context object, right? When we illustrate to you in the code, we'll show you. And then we have we have an accessor method get BMI. So this one here is going to return the BMI for the current person. And to calculate it, and recall this formula here is also reminded, it also reminds you about the formula later in the slides. So you say weight divided by the square of heights, and then return the BMI, right? We talked about syntax for accessor already, so I'm going to assume you're fine, okay? And then we got this particular accessor, also accessor, just another one. You will gain the weights, this is a mutator because it's largely void, so it does not return anything, okay? And then we want to gain the weights by certain kilograms. And then we simply say this dot weight is assigned to this dot weight plus amount. So you can see it's very simple class with only one constructor and two methods over here. Okay, any questions? All right, so now let's go to the second class, which is more exciting. So now for the second class over here, we are creating a console application class called person tester. Okay. And then we're using our main method over here. I'll show you in the Eclipse exactly how to run it, but let's understand just quickly. I'm just go through the line, and let me go through roughly speaking what the code is trying to do, and then we'll show you Eclipse and iPad. Okay, so now line number 3 and 4, we are trying to create two person object, Alan and Tom. They have their initial weights, for example, 72 kilograms, and also 1.72 meters, right? And also similarly for Tom. So we got two person objects. And then what we want to do, we want to output, for example, output to the console, what's the BMI for Alan? According to the measure here, right? 72 divided by 1.72 square. Similarly, we also want to print out Tom.get BMI. Okay, so far very straightforward. And now, line number 9. What does that really mean? Okay, you don't need to answer me, but think to yourself. This is something very fundamental that we did in the previous lecture when we talk about variable assignments. What do I really mean by Alan is assigned to Tom? Does that mean, number one, Alan is now going to point to wherever Tom is going to pointing to, or number two, Tom is now going to point to wherever Alan is pointing to? We got two options over here. Which one? Or either one, or both, right? So that's the question you want to ask yourself. After line number 9, what we want to do is we want to say we want to let Alan, you can see Alan is a context object, should gain weight by 3 kilograms. Okay, so now see what has happened so far. Alan is the only person who has gained weights. Okay, agree? Because we only call Alan that gain weights. We didn't say Tom that gain weights. So now I have two. So you can see this part of the code is exactly identical to this part of the code. Exactly identical, right? So now my question is, you don't need to tell me exact numbers. How would you expect this number over here compare with this number over here? And also, how would you expect this number here for Tom compare with prior to Alan gaining weights? It seems to me, I believe most of you may have the following intuition. Since Alan is the only person who has gained weights, number one, for sure, Alan's BMI is going to increase. Number one. Okay. Number two, since Alan is the only person who has gained weights, Tom hasn't gained weights. So Tom's BMI over here should be the same as Tom's BMI over here. Okay, that's intuitively, I hope you would have thought. Okay. Okay, these two things, and we are scientists. What we want to do is we want to verify this on Eclipse. Okay. Let me recap the two let's recap the two expectations we have. Number one, this number here should be greater than this number over here. Number one. Number two, this number here should be the same as this number here, because Alan is the only one who's gaining weights, right? Let's now verify this without knowing why just yet. Let me go to Eclipse over here. So the source code is also made available to you on the course website, but let me try it out together with you. Okay, you can see that's exactly the code over here, and we want to see what a console output is. So what I will do is I'm gonna simply run this as Java application, right? It's been set up already. Now let's look at the console output. Wow, what's wrong? Is my computer crazy? You can see here, what we said before, Alan's BMI should have increased after he has gained 3 kilograms, but no, his BMI has decreased from 24 to 20. That seems to be a contradiction, doesn't it? And number two, since Tom is the only person who has gained weights, so now in that case, Tom's BMI should remain the same because Tom is not the person who gained weights, but his BMI changed from 19 to 20. So this output here is completely making nonsense to me. Everybody agree? Can anybody explain why? Okay, so since everybody is kind of shy and quiet, I suppose either you're very confident knowing about what the answer is, why such contradictions are the case, or you're simply completely confused, simply because your understanding about aliasing is not deep enough to actually answer this question. I can tell you that number one, my computer is okay, it's not going crazy. Number two, my Eclipse is also producing the correct result. So now, in order for you to really understand completely what's happening here for these numbers, that's kind of counterintuitive. You want to draw some diagram to really make your mental model explicit. Let me do that. Okay, that's about Eclipse illustration. You should really definitely do that when you after class. Okay, again, so this for your information, that's a calculation for the formula, and that guy here again, we expected this number here to be increasing, but it's not. And also we're expecting this number to be the same as this number here, but it's not. Okay, let's understand why. And let me switch to iPad. Okay, so now in order for your understanding to be complete, I put all the three things together. Okay, so that you can understand very well. Okay, I'm gonna zoom in and zoom out if necessary. Okay, first of all, let's so basically when we execute this particular fragment of Java code as Java application, we're going to execute the code line by line. Let's visualize line by line. Let me now start with, first of all, line number 3. Okay, now line number 3 over here is Alan is pointing to a new object with 72 and also 1.72. And remember, for every person object, they should have weights and heights, right? So these are the defining attributes for every person object. So how will we visualize the blue line? Okay, the way to do it is like this. First of all, in Java, what we will do is we're going to create an object over here. Remember how we visualize the object. So now the object is of type person. So now it's going to be person over here. And then every person has the two attributes, weight and height. Okay, for short, I'm going to say weight and height. And now we set it to be 72 and also 1.72, right? So it's now going to be 72 and also 1.72. And then Alan conceptually is now going to store the address of this particular object. So as I said before, visually, to show it, you can simply say Alan is now pointing to this particular object, right? That's about line number 3. Okay. Hopefully now you can also do the visualization for line number 4. Let me use another color here. Let me use pink. So we're going to create another object of the same class called Tom, right? So basically the way to draw that, okay, and then with 65 and also 1.81. And now to visualize it, let's take a look. So now I'm going to create just another box with the same structure because we're instantiating from the same class. And then we have person over here, and then we got weights and we got heights. But now it's going to be 65 and also 1.81. So 65 and 1.81. And now Tom is now going to store the address of this object here. So now Tom is now going to point to this particular object. Okay. So now we have now traced through line number 3 and line number 4 already. Okay. Okay, guys, any question? Okay. It's really important. So now what we have to do now is to consider line. Okay, let me be here. We got to consider line number 6 and also line number 8 to actually see how the BMI is calculated. Okay. In order to do that, we have to know how to do. You can see we are calling the same method over here. Get BMI, get BMI. Are they going to return back to us the same value? Not necessarily, because the context objects are different. So that's something I would like to review quickly together with you as well. Okay, let's take a look. So now, in order for me to trace line number 6, specifically Alan.get BMI over here, okay, let's now be very careful over here. In order to see how this calculation would go, first of all, we see that we are calling this particular get BMI method from the person class, right? So now let's switch the context to the person class. And we're calling get BMI over here, right? Get BMI. And now we talk about this over here. So what's this? As we said before, this will be the context object. In this case, it will be Alan. So what I would do is, conceptually, you should do the substitution yourself. So now that means this is Alan. And also this is Alan. So now we are saying Alan.weights divided by Alan.heights square. So now that means this guy over here is going to, I'm not going to tell you the absolute value, that's not important. So now that what I will do is, Alan.weights is 72, which is over here, 72, and also Alan.height is also 1.72. So this is going to calculate 72 divided by 1.72 square. Okay, hopefully everybody's following. The most important thing for you to see from this part here is Alan here is going to replace the this over here back to the template. Okay, let's do something similar very quickly. Now, if I want to calculate line number 8 and then do Tom.get BMI, right? So now you can see we are calling the same fragment of code, the method get BMI. However, we are using a different context object, which is Tom. So what I would do is I'm now going back here, and now we are calling the same get BMI method for the second time. So now the this over here is going to be replaced by Tom, and this over here is replaced by Tom, as you can see from the color. So now what's Tom.weights? Tom.weights is 65 over here, as opposed to, sorry. The 72 should be, I made a slight typo here. Let me fix it quickly. Otherwise, you may get confused. 72 should be here, okay? So now for Tom.weights, it should be 65, right? So now it's going to be 65 rather than 72, and also it's going to be 1.81 rather than 1.72. Okay, so now that means over here we're gonna have 65 divided by 1.81 divided square. Okay, so this is what it is going to return. Okay, so far so good. Okay, so now we are now entering the most difficult part for this example, the tricky part. What does line number 9 does for us? Let me highlight it. Line number 9 over here, we are trying to do some assignments over here, right? So now what does it really do? Okay. First of all, it is an assignment. When you say Alan is assigned to Tom. Remember, when we review assignments, we know that this is the targets and this is the source. What we are really trying to do is to store whatever that's in the source into the targets. We're overriding whatever that's currently stored in the targets. And Tom and Alan, they're object variables, which means they're storing address. So what we're doing is we're storing the address of Tom into the address of Alan. So that means Alan is now going to point to wherever Tom is pointing to, right? That's something we did briefly last time, okay? So now let me write it down for you. So now after this particular assignment, we know that Alan points to where Tom points to. Okay, this is the conclusion we have from that particular assignment. But now, how can we reflect it to our diagram? So now Alan is not going to change its pointer. So now Alan, rather than pointing to over here, Alan is now going to point to this particular guy over here. Okay, so now let's try that. Okay, now if we do that, so now when we say Alan dot gain weights, now the question is, when you say Alan dot gain weights, are we really Are we really trying to gain? We are really trying to gain the weight for the original Alan or the new Alan? That's the critical question. The answer is we are really trying at this point. We are really trying to gain the weight for Tom, because now Tom and Alan are actually pointing to the same objects. Let me make it more explicit for you. Tom is pointing to this object here. Alan is pointing to this object here, right? You're pointing to the same objects, really. Okay. So now let me just go a little bit more details. Okay. And then you can figure out the calculation yourself later. So now if I try to say Alan that gain weights 3 over here, the context object over here is Alan. So now we're going to call this particular gain weights method here. So now this will be replaced by Alan, right? So now we're going to increase the weight by 3. So the amount parameter here should be 3. So now gain by 3. So now if we follow the pointer for Alan, we are really updating this object here, and then we're increasing the weight by 3. So 65 rather than is going to be 68. Okay, 68 over here. So now you can see not only that it's going to change the weight for the new Alan, but also it's going to change the weights for Tom as well, because now they're alias to the same objects. So now if you try to get Alan.get BMI and also Tom.get BMI, first of all, it's going to be the same value, right? It's actually going to be 68 divided by 1.81 squared. So that's one of the contradiction that we had, right? So now you can see over here. So that's why these two values are exactly the same, right? And then I'll leave that as an exercise for you. Why? As long as you try to do calculation yourself in the calculator or in your mind, you're going to see why this number here should be less and this number here should be more, right? It's just simple calculation. But the most important message for you to take from this example here is you want to know exactly how you actually can visualize the object creations and calling the methods. Okay, so that would be the end of this particular example here. Is there any question you would like me to answer? Please. Anyone? Anybody? Any confusion or any further example or any further clarification you might need, you can ask me to explain. Anybody? Okay, I'll pause for maybe another few seconds if you got any questions. Park, please ask question for your colleagues. Thank you. Oh no, Park, pretend you're still students. Do you have any question about the Java? So I can illustrate how to use. Oh, okay. Anyway, okay. So do you have a Java question or no? Okay, never mind. So okay, so I would say the lecture is here, but you know, I want to say typically this lecture here may be ended with some question from the students, but I guess you guys may not have any questions so far. That's fine. So now, in order for me to stop the lecture, I gotta stop the active presenter, right? So I would say there's a keyboard shortcut, Command and